Mention about Dee Dee practicing witchcraft. What does Gypsy Rose say about that?
Let's delve into the backstory of Gypsy Rose's mother and why Gypsy Rose thinks she's a witch. Clauddine Blanchard, also known as Dee Dee, was born on May 3, 1967 in Chalk Bay, Louisiana. She was French-Canadian. Her mother was Emma Louise Grisclair Petra. I will be using that pronunciation of the last name, although there are many ways to pronounce Petra. Her father was Claude Petra Sr., and together Claude and Emma ended up having 6 children: Claude Jr., Claudia, Evans, Tate, Dorla, and last but certainly not least, Clauddine, which makes Clauddine the baby of the family, and many of her siblings considered her the spoiled one. The Blast published an article where one of Dee Dee's brothers said that Dee Dee was diagnosed with a heart murmur at a young age, and that their mother kept her from, quote, a lot of stuff. He continued, she wouldn't be able to play outside. Maybe that's where part of Dee Dee got that, because she was a sick kid. And I must admit, this is a striking similarity indeed. Laura Petre was Dee Dee's stepmother, and she helped raise Dee Dee as a child. But Laura certainly did not have nice things to say. She says that Dee Dee was a very filthy person, and if things did not go her way, she see to it that you would pay. And did we pay, she says, paid a lot. Now, when Dee Dee was 17, she worked as a nursing aide alongside her stepmother Laura and her friend Kristy. Kristy would later become Gypsy's stepmother while Gypsy was still a child. This is Kristy talking about Dee Dee when they were teenagers.
Character. Rod was 17 years old when he met Dee Dee. And I'll never forget when he came up to me and he's like, oh, I met this girl, you gotta meet her. So he introduced me. She was real sweet, real nice. And I clearly could see that she was in love with Rod. In fact, Rod's mom worked at the library and she was checking in the books and came across a book on how to get pregnant. And when she went to stamp it in, Dee Dee's name was there. And next thing you know, Dee Dee's pregnant. 9 months later, Gypsy Rose Blanchard came into the world.
So some important takeaways up until now is that Dee Dee worked as a nursing aide. She checked out a book from the library about getting pregnant, and that's just what she did. So in some ways, Dee Dee probably felt as though she manifested Gypsy Rose into her life. She even had the name Gypsy picked out. The father, Rod, liked the band Guns N' Roses, and so that's where Rose came from. So here we have little Gypsy Rose. At this time, it was 1991, and remember that Dee Dee was 24 years old while Rod was 17 years old. First, let's take a look at some of the factors that may have led up to Munchausen by proxy. Pictured here is Evans, one of Dee Dee's older brothers, and he says that Dee Dee was their mom's favorite child, and that Dee Dee enjoyed being, quote, the little princess. This is very reminiscent of how Dee Dee treated Gypsy Rose as a child when she would dress her up in Disney princess dresses. Secondly, let's not forget that Emma kept Dee Dee in the house because Emma also claimed that Dee Dee was a sick child. Thirdly, their father Claude told producers that Dee Dee's mother was a shoplifter. He was quoted saying, her mama was a shoplifter and all kinds of stuff. I don't know how many times she had to go to court for shoplifting and other things. He later spoke on Emma's shoplifting again, stating how Dee Dee liked to steal like Emma liked to steal. And Claude says that he lost track of the number of times that Emma had to go to court for shoplifting. He also alleged that she would steal other people's clothing from the laundromat, and she had also stolen $3,000 to $4,000 from him. Speaking of Claude, a fourth factor is that Gypsy Rose states in her book that her grandfather Claude touched her when she was 9. This also could have very well happened to Dee Dee when she was a child. So the Munchausen by proxy began very early with Gypsy Rose. She was only about 3 months old when Dee Dee first took her to the doctor, claiming that she had sleep apnea and that Gypsy would stop breathing during her sleep. And although the doctors could never find anything wrong, Dee Dee kept insisting. And after Hurricane Katrina hit, Dee Dee and Gypsy Rose moved to Missouri, and this gave Dee Dee the perfect excuse. She told the new doctors that all of Gypsy's medical records had gotten destroyed. Let's listen to Gypsy Rose talk about her medical conditions.
What medical conditions did you believe you suffered from?
Leukemia, asthma, both vision and hearing impaired, muscular dystrophy, and seizures.
Did you always know you could walk if you wanted to?
Yes.
She told you you had to stay in a wheelchair when you could walk. How did she convince you to do that?
I was so young, so me looking up to her so much and just believing that she knows best, I didn't question it.
Did you believe you were sick?
There are certain illnesses that I knew I didn't have. I knew that I didn't need the feeding tube. I knew that I could eat, and I knew that I could walk, but I did believe my mother when she said that I had leukemia.
So why would Dee Dee do this? Money, trips, housing, notoriety, as well as sympathy. Dee Dee's mother, Emma, was 59 years old when she passed in 1997, and Dee Dee was with her mother a lot in the latter years. However, Laura, Dee Dee's stepmother, stated that Dee Dee stuck around because Dee Dee would steal from her family, especially if things did not go her way. And after Emma passed, many family members expressed suspicion that Dee Dee had something to do with it because Dee Dee would deny her own mother food. Laura outright blames Dee Dee for Emma's passing, as she states, to leave your own mama dirty and asking for food and not want to feed her, that's evil. Kristy, Gypsy's stepmother, also weighed in by saying to reporters that the day her mom died, Dee Dee was in the house somewhere, and Dee Dee was starving her. Dee Dee wasn't giving her anything to eat. And many people believe this to be true by how Dee Dee treated her own daughter, Gypsy Rose. Kristy goes on to say Dee Dee was starving Emma. Dee Dee wasn't giving her anything to eat. I asked her sister, I was like, I hate to ask, but do you think Dee Dee had anything to do with her mom's death? And the sister responded, now I wonder. Let's take a listen to Gypsy Rose's claim about Dee Dee and how she treated her with food.
Oh, what happens when she got upset with you?
It would go into an argument that would last a couple days, or it could be something where she wouldn't feed me for 2 days or so.
So to recap, we have 4 very close family members that believe that Dee Dee was the cause of her own mother's passing. So now let's fast forward several years later. Laura now passes in 2018, and Gypsy herself wrote in her book that Dee Dee hated Laura and that it stemmed from an old argument when Dee Dee was still living with Laura, and Laura told Dee Dee that she did not want her there anymore. And after that, Gypsy says that Dee Dee never liked her stepmother and that the hatred got so intense that Dee Dee would start putting the herbicide called Roundup in Laura's food to make her sick. This claim was also echoed by Dee Dee's brother Claude and her nephew Bobby. Bobby also goes on to say, one day my grandfather and Gypsy were hanging out, and Gypsy sees the roundup in the corner and tells my grandfather, "Oh, that's the vitamins that my mom gives to Grandma Laura May." Bobby recounted that Dee Dee did all the cooking, and he says she was poisoning my stepmother. Supposedly, she was giving her some Roundup in her food and stuff. And so they all think that basically Dee Dee had something to do with that. And even though Dee Dee passed in 2015 and Laura passed in 2018, they say that Laura was sick from the Roundup for many years before she passed. So the family members now think that Dee Dee had a hand in her own mother's passing, Emma, as well as her stepmother's passing, Laura.
Mention about Dee Dee practicing witchcraft. What does Gypsy Rose say about that?
Yeah, this is very interesting because Gypsy says, even to this day, a part of her still believes her mother is a witch, because this was something that was so deeply ingrained into her when she was a child, that her mother possessed these supernatural powers, because she was constantly threatening her and saying that, you know, I am going to conjure a spell to make sure that you behave because you've been such a bad girl. And she says, hey, look, moms and dads, I'm not condoning it, but if your child is out of line, that's a very powerful way to make sure that they do get in line, because she said that she was absolutely shocked and, you know, completely still at all times, just out of fear that her mother might produce some sort of spell that actually harms her even further than what she was already feeling in the time. You know, we know that she was bound in a wheelchair, and her mother's saying that I can make it even worse for you. And so to this day, she still believes a portion of that her mom has those powers. But there was several anecdotes in there about her mom going out and shopping, get a cow's tongue so that she can brew it into a potion. Really some dark and twisted things that her mother was doing to manipulate her.
So Gypsy states that this really all started when Gypsy met a guy at a convention in 2011, and she tried to run away to be with him. But Dee Dee caught her and ended up chaining Gypsy to the bed for 2 weeks as punishment, and she also put a voodoo hex on her. Let's listen to Gypsy talk about this.
Run away once, but Dee Dee found her a few hours later, and there were consequences.
She physically chained you to the bed.
She physically chained me to the bed and put bells on the doors.
So this is an excerpt from Gypsy's book, and it reads, she printed out a picture of Dan, and she printed out a picture of me, and she went to the store and got a mason jar and a cow tongue. She continues, she put the cow tongue in the mason jar with the 2 pictures and a little bit of my menstrual blood. She buried it in the backyard and said, you will never find love, you will never be happy. So I think that it's true. I just think it's true because every time I get close to someone, they leave me. End quote. So Gypsy goes on to say that she feels that her mother was a very powerful witch that used many different spells against her and others, and she saw shapes and shadows, and her mother heard voices. Gypsy herself says that she practiced Wicca in prison because it felt familiar. Here is a picture where she had the pentagram medallion around her neck. So with all this, what do you guys think? And feel free to comment below. Not my cup of tea.